In this video, I hope to cover in some pretty gross detail all the steps of installing Ubuntu 24 and joining it to a Windows domain. For this, I'm going to be using a physical machine, and if you want to see the fastest way possible, see the description for that link and the full written guide. Starting at the install screen, choose your language and accessibility options. For internet, for now, choose none. If you're on Wi-Fi, it might hang for a few minutes after clicking next. It might be updating the launcher and not giving an indication. Just let it sit for a minute. Continuing on, we're choosing all the default options and no extra packages. Here you can choose to dual boot or erase the entire drive for a clean install. On the account page, choose a name for the local admin. For computer name, put anything you want for now. We'll update the domain naming context later. Lastly, pick your time zone and confirm the install. Log in with that account you created earlier. Go ahead and get past all this. We're going to open and pin terminal. Go ahead and save yourself a few keystrokes by setting persistent root. Now we want to set a proper host name to match our domain. I'll change the host name and include the domain. Alright, host name set. Changes are instant, unlike Windows. Here I'm going to connect to Wi-Fi. If you're hardwired, the following steps will still be the same. If you need to manually adjust IP settings, select the interface and then this gear down here. Here our Wi-Fi tab is already populated, same with security. On the IP settings tab, we can modify to DHCP only, manual, and a few others. And in the spirit of this guide, I'll choose manual. Enter valid IP mask, then gateway. Make sure to add one or more DNS servers. If not already filled in, you can specify the domain here. And we'll also go over a few other places to add this info.
Oh, déjà vu.
After all that, back in terminal, I want to restart NetManager to apply the changes. Alright, Wi-Fi is back now. And checking, we do see the 202 address we set. And ping Google. Well, yeah, that's not hosted internal. Yeah, we can resolve its name when entered correctly. Huzzah! At this point, I'm going to tell the system to query for updates. This should launch an update prompt in a moment. Let's prepare the install command for all the domain join packages needed. There's that prompt. There's that prompt. Go ahead and get those going. We'll finish typing out this command, then we'll let the updates finish before carrying on. Alright, we want to choose restart later. Now that we have all updates and needed packages installed, we'll go ahead and do that reboot. Alright, log back in. More work in the terminal, so we'll set persistent root again. Alright, let's take a second to go over the resolve service. We won't be removing or disabling this service. We will be modifying a few of the settings, and I'll go over the actual proper way to do that. Opening the config file, and looking at the top line here, this tells us we are opening a symlink. Go ahead and copy whatever file is listed here. And let's open that. So after we open this file, it still says don't edit. Down here you'll see our search prefix filled in, and that's because it's set over in the Wi-Fi settings. I didn't want to save that. Opening the correct config file now. Here it tells us we are in the correct file. Let's modify the things we need. Yada yada. Looking at the third paragraph here, the two recommended ways are editing this config or using drop-in methods. And here it says drop-in methods are preferred, but that is also an extra item to create and manage in the end. They give you a command down here that displays your current settings. Run that in a new window if you want. It's basically just a read-only version of this file. It's handy to have open while making edits. And this is the file you want to modify your DNS settings. You can add them with even more manual possibilities. You can add ports, maybe a fallback DNS server, additional subdomains if needed, plenty more. In this one, we're only going to disable the local resolver cache. This will make the internal resolver always query your listed DNS servers. Over in the config file, you want to uncomment those lines. If you want, you can add one DNS server here. Check on what I have before I make more changes. Yeah, I did say 2 earlier. And you can also pull this info in the terminal. I'll remove one of my additionals. I'll do .9. And I'll go ahead and set that .12 in config file and save it. We need to restart the service to load any new settings. Why didn't that work? Yeah, why didn't that work? Oh, spelling. Yep, that helps. And also restart that network manager again. I'm going to check in current settings again. And it only shows that .12 server like we want. And then back to the original config. It's always going to give you the internal DNS service IP. Unless you install something like Unbound, that's outside of the scope of this. The final option you might want to add IP mappings into is the host file. If you use this method, you will want to add your domain name and your primary DC here. Out of all those locations, I advise only picking one and make all your network changes there. Alright, I did set my host name before, right? Yeah. Alright, let's reboot. Make sure everything sticks. Some things only show up after a reboot, you know? Let's make sure we can discover the domain we want to join. Successfully found. Down here it says required, but that's just a statement. It doesn't know we already have these installed. Now instead of discover, we will join and specify an admin account to use. Alright, and here we see it successfully joined our domain. If you scroll up a little bit, you might see an error about device not in your Kerberos. If you haven't specifically set up Kerberos for devices, don't worry about that. If you do a realm list, you shouldn't have any errors. Using realm permit, I want to allow all my domain users to log into this laptop. And you can set individual user accounts if you need. Alright, let's test if we can properly query a user from Active Directory. Good result. But if we don't use an FQDN, it won't work. We'll adjust that in a moment. Alright, let's test authentication. That worked. That worked. but you'll see down here it says no directory. We'll allow home directories for domain users in a moment. For now, let's open our SSSD config file. First, make sure cached cred is true. This is needed for a laptop. If you can't connect to a domain controller, it can't authenticate your creds, you won't be able to log in remotely. And down here you can define whether or not the fqdn is required. We're going to change this to false. And you will want to add this line at the bottom. This prevents you from being locked out if it can't refresh any group policies. Not entirely sure if these are case sensitive, but since the trues are, since we modified this file, we need to make sure all the permissions are still correct. Then restart it. And as expected, no permission errors. And checking the status. And we see no errors here as well. Now let's check that fqdn setting we changed. No issues querying without it now. Alright, using the PAM command, we can enable those home folders for domain users. One last thing that might be good to verify is the NS switch config. In here, you just want to make sure SSS is listed. Now, with everything configured and verified, let's reboot and log in with the user. At the login screen down here, click Not Listed. Log in with or without fqdn, depending on what you set. You see right there at the bottom, it's creating a new home directory. Alright, so with this user is only a local account, no elevated privileges. Let's go ahead and enable this user to use the sudo command. Logging back into that root account you made, we need to use the vsudo command. And down at the bottom of this file, there are a few options to edit root permissions. To grant a single user root permission, go ahead and add them here. Again, with or without fqdn based on what you set in the SSSD config. Now this user will have sudo privileges, which completes the guide. Hope you guys found it helpful.